All right, on the phone now, we have Mr. Ken Casey from the Dropkick Murphys. And I always like to preface every interview I do with Ken, and I'm sure he's tired of hearing about it from me, but I believe that Ken, along with the Dropkick Murphys and myself and the former WAAF street team, are still the only official entrants into the South Boston St. Patrick's Parade that were asked to leave in the middle of the parade. And
that's right. Many patrons have been asked to leave, but not many entrants.
Right. Not many people with floats. One year we had the Dropkicks playing on a flatbed truck almost the entire length of the parade, and it was during the week when you guys were doing your string of shows for St. Patrick's Day, and there were Dropkick Murphys fans from literally all over the world who did not, I guess, made the police a little nervous, let's just say.
And when the parade went left towards Southie Heights, the police told us to go straight back onto Broadway.
Yeah. I would like to thank, again, the Boston Police Department for being very professional and well-mannered.
It took me a half a block to even figure out we had been kicked out of the parade.
I know.
Because the people were still following us.
Yeah, we just kept it going, our own little show. I just remember the police officer who said, just turn here and keep going. And our promotions director asked him why. And all he said was, just get the out of here. It was unbelievable.
Sounds like a Boston cop, yeah.
Yeah, very professional, very well-mannered. Yeah. Well, Dropkicks have a new album coming out Friday, July 4th, For the People. And I spent some time with it last night. I have to say, you guys, I mean, it's another kick-ass record, but I have to say, you guys sound a little more pissed than you usually do in some of the songs. And, at these times, there's a lot to talk about. You know, those videos went around of you confronting MAGA supporters, and you did it in a great way by asking where their merch was made. But how did you expect to be kind of in the spotlight after that? Did you expect that much attention after some of those incidents went viral from your shows?
You never. The cameras, unfortunately or unfortunately, the camera's always rolling when you're, in the world today. So nothing that happens won't potentially be, caught on film. And that's not the first time we've had, incidents with MAGA. We had another one that went viral in like 2022 and, whatever. I mean, sometimes these things just unfold. And it's interesting what goes viral and what doesn't or whatever. But, I guess when you really look at it, like we've always been a band that's had, kind of a blue collar working class audience. And that is a large portion of what made the shift after Obama to Trump, and so there's this like large portion of our audience that has, well, I don't want to say maybe our audience, but a large portion of the country, obviously, that is kind of somehow decided that Republicans, who to me, especially MAGA Republicans, who do everything they can to support the billionaire class, would ever care about regular people. So we're kind of a breeding ground for being the front lines of the whole thing. And, we've never changed our tune in the almost 30 years we've been a band. By no means there to like wave the flag for the Democratic Party either. But at the same time, like what's the side that we're a two-party system in this country, unfortunately. And only one side is voting to give, tax cuts to the ultra wealthy while cutting school lunches for kids and, cutting Medicare and wanting to get rid of Social Security eventually or privatize it and destroy it. So, duty to kind of speak up and be on the front lines of it. We've been on the front lines of a lot of political stuff, whether it's playing on picket lines and social justice protests throughout the history of the band. So why would we do that and be that for 29 years only to kind of cower in the moment now,
Well, what do you say to those people who say, just shut up and play the hits, that politics doesn't belong in music, that I didn't come to this show to hear you talk about politics?
Yeah, I to a degree I get it. You know what I mean? But I don't really stop the show to soapbox for too long. You know what I mean? But I do think it's important that even if it's just for the record, so when history is told later, there's a footnote to say these are the bands that spoke out, and these are the bands that kept their head down and kept quiet, so it was easier for them, and we don't want to be known as that. Now, there's other times where, like in some of those viral videos, it might get into a longer discourse because a MAGA supporter comes and he's in the front row with a sign or something, and he's desperately craving the attention. Some days I give it to him. Some days, it might be an opportunity like the one you were speaking about, where actually it kind of, and I had a friendly talk with the guy afterwards. He was a good guy. He actually said, "Hey, I'm not here to be, I was here in a friendly way to create debate because he said, I consider you guys family. I've been coming to see you for 20 years, and I don't fall out with family over politics." And I was like, wow, that kind of gave me hope for like America, because let's face it, everyone's so divided that no matter who wins and who loses in the White House and in the Senate and the Congress, like if we don't all somehow find a way to communicate again, we're screwed, So, yeah. And sometimes, we're all human, right? Like, so some days I might have a nice discourse with someone, but on the other hand, if the guy's coming at me with an angry face, like, I'm going to get my back up too, So it was a good lesson for me that not all these people, even the ones that have signs and stuff, might not necessarily have like hate in their heart,
Yeah, and that's very uncommon for either side to seek out middle ground like that. Unfortunately, it's uncommon these days.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So it was a good talk, and they were good sports. They lost. The bet was that their merchandise, their MAGA merchandise, wasn't made in America, and it wasn't. And they took their shirts off, and we gave them made in America Dropkick stuff. And some people might say, well, it was probably bootleg. Well, maybe it was, but if you're going to don a shirt that's whole message is to make America great again, like, wouldn't you? So one could argue, oh, well, maybe that MAGA shirt was a bootleg, and maybe it was. But I would think that if you're the type of person that's going to wear a shirt whose sole express message is to make America great again, that you'd probably want to check the tag of where it was made. Was it made in the country you want to make great again? Dropkick Murphys makes our merchandise in America, and you could get a bootleg of Dropkicks that wasn't, but our whole platform isn't to make America great again. You know what I mean? That's not what,
right.
That's not the sole reason we exist for. So I think that, there's just some irony there, and, they took it well. And who knows, maybe it was a little bit of a eye opener for them to say, maybe there is some hypocrisy to our whole movement,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've got a few songs on the new album for the people that address subjects like that. Bury the Bones is one that stands out to me, Stand With Us. But I want to talk to you about a couple of the songs that seem more personal, especially Chesterfield's and Aftershave. That really is just a beautiful song. And is that really your grandfather that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not just even if it was just a story you made up, I was like near tears. But
no, that's really my grandfather. Yeah.
That's amazing. So he was a pretty big influence on.
My father died when I was 7, and and my mother really couldn't control me as a teen. You know what I mean? And
surprising.
My grandfather was my grandfather was that one that did it, and not just in an authority figure, but also as a role model, you know what I mean? And his wife, he died, before the band started, but his wife, Peg Kelly, was around for a good portion of the band and was arguably our biggest fan, and got such a kick out of it. And my grandfather, being someone who I think would have been very impressed with not so much the success as what we're doing in the moment now, and I think that you just kind of sometimes wonder whoa, would he have enjoyed all this? And then that brought up, just the larger points of like being around to see like other parts of my life, my children, like
Yeah.
the Red Sox winning, all that kind of stuff that he didn't get to see.
It paints such a great picture. It's so vivid, and I love that one. And then please tell me who Sooner Kill 'Em First is about, if you can.
Oh, well, it's in a way, it's about me. It's about, if you've messed up your life, you could, a lot of people, I mean, I turned my life around when I was very young, but a lot of people, when I was doing so much damage to my life, whether it be, my antics or my alcohol and drug abuse, whatever it be, I was ready to blame everybody else in the world, like it was their fault, it was his fault, it was her fault, it was the cop's fault, it was the judge's fault, it was my mother's fault. But in reality, like I was doing more damage to me than anybody else in the world was, so that's why the hook line says, if someone did to me what I let me do to me, I'd kill them first.
I was kind of hoping it was about Derek Sanderson. But because you mentioned McGann's and being over by the garden and stuff, yeah. I was kind of hoping it would. But still, it's a great message and it's a great song.
I'm sure Derek could identify with the sentiment.
Yeah. And finally, you mentioned before with the T-shirt thing. If you're going to wear a T-shirt, you got to follow through. On what message you're saying, and you kind of did that. If I could talk about that a little bit before I let you go, you went to Ukraine to help deliver assistance to some people in Ukraine. And you said it because, and I love this, because if you're going to support something, you should know as much about it as you can. And what did you find out over there that we're not necessarily hearing about in the news?
Sure. Well, so Dropkicks has done some T-shirts to, raise money for Ukraine. And I just felt like, you got to put your money where your mouth is. And a friend of mine asked me, he said, hey, we're doing this humanitarian aid convoy. Would you want to go? And I was like, yeah, how can I say no? And we drove vehicles in from Warsaw to Kyiv. I particularly drove an ambulance. Ambulances last an average of 11 days on the front lines in Kyiv. The front lines in Ukraine, because what the Russians do is they'll call it like a double tap, like they'll bomb a school or a church or whatever it might be and wait for the ambulances to arrive and take the victims out, and then send a drone in to blow up the ambulance, which
Jesus.
They say is, actually a war crime and a form of terrorism, because that's in an effort to really strike fear that you're not abiding by, kind of humanitarian rules of war, so to speak. And I just found, I didn't go over there as like a press guy, but there was some people that have like, social media platforms like some people involved with Midas Touch network were there. And I ended up doing an interview with a soldier in one of the dugout trenches, because, they're almost fighting like trench warfare over there, like World War I style. And I did an interview, just conversation that turned into an interview that I just thought was something that you're definitely not hearing over here. And it was about, the guy was, he was a higher up in the military, but he was a civilian until not all that long ago. He was a lawyer, so he spent the first few years of the war, using his capabilities as a lawyer to facilitate paperwork and whatnot to get aid in and things like that. And then eventually, so many Ukrainians are dying that this guy was a lawyer. He has a 4-year-old child, and he's on the front lines. And, so it's just, when you're meeting the people and, and even in Kyiv, the air raid sirens are going off, and they give you an app to tell you whether it's a ballistic missile or a drone attack coming in.
Oh, my God.
When it's a ballistic missile, you absolutely go to the basement, to the shelter. But, when it's a drone attack, it might only be taking out, one office window or one hotel window type of size. So people kind of just roll the dice like, well, I just hope it's not my window. And, you're driving around the city and there's a load of buildings with, gaping holes in them from drones, and so it's just wild how kind of these guys are fighting the fight against such a overwhelming force. You know what I mean? It's like David versus Goliath. But at the same time, they're continuing on to try to live their lives as best as normal, and which is unbelievable. People going to work while there's air raid sirens going. It's and very. I just think that listen, politics has divided this whole issue, and somehow Ukraine's been vilified by a lot of people. But I just think that they're fighting. They were invaded. And, they're fighting a fight that could land on the rest of Europe and then eventually our doorstep. So I had a guy call me while I was over there. And he said, oh, you're in Ukraine? Geez, well, I hope both sides cut the shit and get their act together. And I said, I'm sorry, what did you say? I said, both sides cut the shit. Only one side invaded another side.
Right.
So, but I feel like more than anything I got to see, the human side of it, that people are, it's all hands on deck. Lawyers, musicians. One musician was a tattoo artist kid that was big in the scene over there was killed, and then one of their biggest artists, Boombox, I believe his name was, is on the front lines, and he's a guy who sells out arenas, and he's fighting on the front lines and had a shrapnel wound in his face and stuff, and it's just these guys it's all hands on deck, and how would America feel if that's the way we had to be,
Right. Well, Kenny, thanks for sharing that, man. And Kenny, when are you guys coming back to the area?
We're playing a free show in Quincy on July 12th as part of Quincy's 400th birthday, and then we're doing a show with Bad Religion at the Bank New Hampshire Pavilion in New Hampshire, and then we're doing the Irish Festival at Suffolk Downs in September.
Awesome. Kenny, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing you at those shows, man. Thanks.
All right, brother. Thank you very much.